With the success of the award-winning Batman the Animated Series and its sequel, The New Batman Adventures, of course, WB were ready to move full steam ahead into the next chapter of The Dark Knight in Gotham City. The only thing was, the studio needed a way to keep those fans of the original show who were now in their teens, but at the same time also attract new fans to the franchise. They needed something fresh and new that felt like a continuation of the story that was so beloved, and the only two that could make it work would be the legendary team that worked on what came before, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. Unfortunately, that was not what the creators were pitched. They were pitched an idea for a prequel about the adventures of a teenage Bruce Wayne, which both Timm and Dini absolutely hated. You see, this was during a time where the two were in the middle of their sequel to Batman the Animated Series, The New Batman Adventures, and they were afraid of the world they had been building with Batman, as well as the Superman animated series being overwritten. The two creators had worked hard on this animated world, and to just scrap it and start over, well, it was like a punch to the gut, especially to Timm, who is quoted saying, "I'm not sure I could adequately describe my feelings at that moment. It was surreal and disappointing, shocking and dreamlike. Like, this can't be happening. It was just not the words I expected to hear. Let's just say that. We were in the middle of doing our second iteration of Batman. We'd found our groove. We were digging the look of the show. We were digging the scripts and stuff. We were on fire. So to have the rug pulled out from under us, it was just like, oh god, seriously?" End quote. The creators needed to find a way to keep the higher-ups happy as well as make sure the world they had been building would stay intact. The only way to do this was to move forward into the future and introduce a new Batman, which honestly, saying it out loud just sounds insane. At this point in time, Batman had always been Bruce Wayne. There was no Batman Reborn with Dick Grayson, or Jim Gordon in his Batman mech suit. This was new territory, and as a creator, it had to be scary to try and find a way that made sense for a new Batman people would come to ultimately accept. Luckily, Timm had help. He recruited James Tucker, a storyboard artist and character designer, as well as Alan Burnett, a writer he had worked with previously on Batman the Animated Series. Together, the three developed the concept of an aging Bruce Wayne training a young teen named Terry McGinnis to take over the Batman mantle. It was the perfect idea, one that would make the studio happy as well as keeping the lore of what came before it intact. Of course, the studio loved the idea and greenlit it right away. The goal was to have the show out by next fall, which was incredibly fast, and a little disappointing to our three creators, Dini, Timm, and Burnett, since they really loved what they were working on, writing the adventures of Bruce Wayne Batman, with Timm quoted as saying, "I don't want to do this stupid show. I don't want to do a teenage Batman. We wanted to keep doing the show we were doing, even though we knew that was pretty much a lost cause." End quote. Honestly, this is a very understandable feeling, even if I was a little surprised to hear it. Batman Beyond was such a cool show when I was a kid. It felt slick and different than any other superhero show at the time, so I always thought Dini and Timm were just as ecstatic to work on it as their previous work. But Batman the Animated Series was their baby after all, and they had worked on it for so long. At the same time, it was still doing very well in the ratings, so to just drop it for this new show, I can see why he felt this way now. Timm ultimately came around though after talking to one of the producers who compared the potential of the show to a futuristic Spider-Man, a teenaged hero having to balance school, dating, and saving a cyberpunkish Gotham in the future, which really got Timm pumped the more he thought about it. The first episode premiered on January 10th, 1999. It starts off with a much older Bruce Wayne in a new all-black suit with a red bat symbol on the chest. The suit also appears to have enhanced strength and durability, invisibility, and flight. Obviously, this is to account for an aging 50-something-year-old Bruce with health issues. This was a way he could still fight crime in Gotham City, since what we know from the comics, as long as he is still alive, he will never trust anybody else to be Batman. Only the suit still wasn't enough. As he is trying to save a woman who has been kidnapped, his health issues seem to be getting the better of him, which lets the kidnapper get the upper hand. This gave Bruce no other choice but to pick up a gun off the floor and point it at the kidnapper, who runs away. Now, if you are a huge Batman fan like myself, you know his number one rule is no killing. The reason for this is morality. It's what separates him from someone like the Joker in his own eyes, which of course is partly due to the Joker comparing the two of them. He has often said that they are no different from one another, and the no kill rule, in my opinion, is partly a way to prove that the Batman is better than the Joker, and partly because it's how his parents died. So for Bruce to pick up that gun was a huge deal. That gun helped him see that he can't do this anymore. Age had caught up to him, and he was so disgusted at what he had almost done that he vowed to never put on the cowl again. We then cut to 20 years later, where we are introduced to our new protagonist, Terry McGinnis, on a train ride to school where he saves a woman from a thug dressed in a familiar Joker-like attire. This is not too different from the very beginning of the episode, where Bruce Wayne fails to save himself and the woman without resorting to using a gun. I believe it's supposed to show almost a death and rebirth, the end of Bruce Wayne's Batman, but the beginning of Terry's. Unlike Bruce, Terry stops the Joker fanboy with ease, doesn't resort to using a weapon, hell, doesn't even throw a punch. It's just a well done setup that signals this is our new Batman. We then cut to Gotham High, where we are introduced to the side characters. Dana Tan, Terry's love interest, her friend and popular girl, Chelsea Cunningham, and her boyfriend, also somewhat rival to Terry, Nelson Nash. The girls watch Terry and Nelson during wrestling practice, where Terry seems to be losing and headbutts Nelson in anger. This is another good setup to distinguish the difference between our new Batman and old. While Bruce is always cool-headed and thinks before he acts, Terry, however, is a hothead with somewhat of an ego that acts before he thinks, which seems to get him into trouble. Afterwards, Terry is sent home and we cut to his father, who gets a call from a coworker asking if they could meet. When he gets there, Warren, Terry's father, is given a disc and notices that the coworker has some kind of marks on his hand, but before he could really ask about it, the two men are interrupted by a thug that works for their employer, Mr. Powers. The man with the scars on his hand tries to run, but is knocked out by the thugs, and we see that the scars weren't just on his hand, but all over his body. Afterwards, Warren meets with Mr. Powers to basically make sure he doesn't talk about what had just happened, and to ask about a missing file, which we know was the disc Warren was given. He says he has no idea what happened to the file, so Powers sends him on his way. Back home, Warren looks through the file and is shocked by what he finds, which we don't get to see because we are interrupted by Terry entering the room, begging to go out. Warren reminds him he's grounded due to the fight from earlier, which devolves into a fight between these two that once again shows how quick to anger Terry is. He then storms off anyway, where he meets up with Dana and the rest of the gang in front of a club. Unfortunately, their fun is cut short by the Jokers. Terry jumps in once again without thinking and actually manages to knock a few out. Not that it really mattered though, because he was still outnumbered. The only option for him was to steal one of the Joker's bikes, which begins a chase through the city that ends with him wiping out trying to avoid an elderly Bruce Wayne in front of his manor. This is where we get to one of the best moments in the episode, where Bruce and Terry together fight off the Jokers. Unfortunately, afterwards, Bruce's health gets the better of him and Terry ends up having to help him back into the manor. I always wondered here if Bruce knew this whole time that Terry was his son, which we find out years later in Justice League Unlimited, a show also developed by Bruce Timm, since it just makes no sense for a 70-year-old Bruce Wayne to be off the manor grounds that late at night. Was he actually keeping tabs on Terry and knew he needed help? Anyway, I think it's a fun, interesting theory that I figured I'd share, but now back to the episode. They get inside, and Terry fetches Bruce's meds, then begins to leave as the elderly billionaire falls asleep. But Bruce's giant guard dog was blocking the way, so he heads back inside to call his dad when he notices a giant bat was stuck in an old grandfather clock. Terry reaches in to release it, but when he does, a secret doorway opens and reveals a command center and who the old billionaire actually was. Our hero didn't get a chance to look around for too long before he is hit in the back of the head with a cane and being screamed at to get out. Terry makes his way back home, where he sees multiple police cars and finds his dad has been murdered by what looked to be the Joker gang. After which, Terry moves in with his mom and little brother, where he begins investigating why his father was murdered and by who. During this investigation, he stumbles upon the disc his father was given earlier on in the episode, and is shocked as to what he finds, which we still have no idea what it is, except that now it connects to Wayne Enterprises. So of course, Terry heads back to the manor. This is also due to the cops being so cozy with his father's former boss. The gate opens and the episode ends there. Now, I'm not going to recap the entire show, but I do want to recap these first 2 episodes since they establish who our characters are, especially Terry, and why Bruce decides to trust this kid to take up his mantle. So, moving on now to episode 2. We start right where we left off with Bruce looking through the disc to find that Powers has created some kind of nerve gas and using Wayne Enterprises to do it. By the way, I forgot to mention that Powers' company merged with Wayne Enterprises after Bruce retired. Okay, so now Terry tries to convince Bruce to do something since he's Batman after all, but he refuses, telling Terry to take the disc to Commissioner Barbara Gordon and let the cops handle it from here. Terry suspects there is some deeper reason as to why Bruce doesn't want to handle it himself, but nevertheless he begrudgingly does as Bruce asks. On the way, he is stopped by Mr. Powers and his right-hand goon, who restrains our hero, while Powers asks for the disc he knows Terry has. Terry says he will give it up if his goon lets him free, which he does, but our hero does not hold up his end of the bargain. In a desperate attempt to escape, he throws the disc in the air and runs. Terry gets away, but unfortunately the disc is now in Mr. Powers' hand once again. So now to get the disc back and catch his father's murderer, he boldly steals the Batsuit down in Bruce's lair, which feels like such a Jason Todd thing to do. In fact, Terry really feels like the first 3 Robins rolled into one. He's a great fighter like Dick, quick thinker and intelligent like Tim, and for better or worse, stubborn like Jason Todd. It's really no secret why Bruce is drawn to this kid. Anyway, Terry uses the suit to fly to Wayne Enterprises, where he overhears a business deal going down between Powers and some leader of another country. Apparently the guy wants to buy the nerve gas to use as a weapon against neighboring countries. So the 2 men arrange a meeting place for the exchange, the dock near Wayne Enterprises. As Terry is listening to all this go down, he is caught by Powers' guards, and if things can't get any worse, Bruce has figured out that Terry has taken the suit and demands, through the built-in radio in the cowl, that Terry bring the suit back at once. Unfortunately, our hero is a little busy, making that impossible. So, in anger, Bruce locks down the suit as Terry is surrounded by 4 guards, who now have a very easy target. They begin beating the snot out of our Batman in training, but Bruce doesn't keep it locked for too long. Terry's pleads, as well as the beating he was receiving, was even a bit much for the cold, older Bruce Wayne. So he unlocks the suit, and our new Batman takes out the 4 thugs, all while figuring out how to use the gadgets in the suit, which seems like more luck than anything. Unfortunately, even more guards than Terry can handle appear, but Bruce, now taking on the Alfred or Oracle role, guides him to a broom closet where a hidden door takes our hero to safety. This was not what Terry wanted though. He wanted to stop the man that killed his father and make sure the virus doesn't get out. So he tries to relate to Bruce. He says he knows how his parents died, and the man that killed his father is on that transport. Not unlike with Dick, Bruce softens up a bit after this and kind of sees himself in Terry, a boy that wants nothing but justice for what had been done to him. I think this was the first moment that lit the Batman spark that was once there in Bruce, and from here that spark grows brighter and brighter. What's really kind of a nice touch is that you can hear his voice soften when he tells Terry where to find the hovercraft. Powers and his henchmen had already finished loading the virus onto the carrier when Terry arrived. He hurried towards his goal, knocking out all of the guards on the ground with one fell swoop as the carrier prepared to take off. Powers himself tries to hold off Terry, which only gets him doused with the virus, leaving Terry an opening to swoop onto the carrier, where he gets in and fights off Powers' #1 goon, then crashes the carrier into the ocean, destroying the virus. The next day, Bruce shows up to Terry's home, offering him a job as a part-time assistant, aka the new Batman. While that was happening, we see Powers still alive, transformed into some kind of radioactive supervillain, ending the episode there. This was just the beginning of a fairly successful 3-season run, ending it off with the Return of the Joker movie, as well as a comic book tie-in written by Hilary Batter. Originally, the tie-in book was supposed to be a 6-issue miniseries, but the comic actually sold so well that it was turned into an ongoing series that lasted for 24 issues. Though, this still was not Terry McGinnis's DC Universe debut. Since this was a tie-in to the animated series, his real DC Universe debut comes way later. You see, Batman Beyond was fairly popular, but nowhere near the other DC Animated Universe shows like Superman, Batman, or Justice League. It really wasn't until after the show ended that it began to grow a cult following that gradually became bigger and bigger throughout the years, that finally culminated into a small cameo in Batman issue 700, The Time in the Bat, written by the legend himself, Grant Morrison. This one-shot story is set across different eras of Batman, including the current at the time Dick Grayson Batman, Damian Wayne's future Batman, and of course Terry McGinnis Batman. Honestly, I don't think Grant thought too much about this being Terry's first DCU debut, since he has often said that everything in the Bat history is canon, and I can't really find him talking about it other than wanting to highlight Batman's past, present, and future for the 700th anniversary issue. But this was kind of a big deal, since if it wasn't for this appearance, we may never have gotten Batman Beyond's real first appearance in an ongoing story, 2014's Future's End, a weekly ongoing series during the New 52 era that centered around Terry McGinnis, who is sent back in time by Bruce to stop an AI enemy called Brother Eye from taking over the planet, as well as hunting down all the heroes and assimilating them into the Brother Eye hive mind. But unfortunately, Terry is sent to the wrong time, 5 years ahead of the current DCU future, where Brother Eye's plan had already been put into motion. The series lasted 48 issues and had a slew of different writers and artists. I remember the first issue actually coming out on Free Comic Book Day, and the cover really grabbing my attention because of the fact Batman Beyond was on it. I grabbed that issue, then put it on my pull list right away without even having read it yet. At that time, I felt like the only person that actually liked Batman Beyond, since none of my friends seemed to care, nor did they pick up the free issue. Little did I know it actually had a cult following. But yeah, this story won't be for everybody. I do recommend just checking it out. I think it's really well done for a story that has rotating writers every issue. But now for a warning, because I'm going to get into spoilers. Although we finally had a mainline story with Terry as the main character, this doesn't last long. In the 46th issue, Terry is killed during a battle with a Joker-Batman hybrid cyborg created by Brother Eye. After which, Tim Drake takes over as Batman, and then this leads into a new ongoing with Tim Drake as Batman Beyond, and no real conclusion to Future's End, which may be my least favorite ending to a comic book ever. Okay, I know I said I really enjoyed this story, while this is still true, and I think you still should check it out. However, that ending is just so awful. I mean, we just got Terry McGinnis in the main canon, only to have him killed off? and then have the story continue in a new ongoing Batman Beyond series without him. It just feels like a purposeful slap in the face to Batman Beyond fans. But luckily, in 2022, we finally got a new Batman Beyond story that follows Terry after the death of Bruce Wayne, called Neo Year, and followed by Neo Gothic, both written by Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly. Now, I must admit, at the time of recording this, I have not read them, but did buy them and they are on their way. I'll probably do a review or a retrospective of both of them eventually. In conclusion, Batman Beyond is a well-deserved sequel to Batman the Animated Series. The cyberpunk aesthetic feels like a natural progression from the 1930s noir setting, as well as our protagonist doesn't feel like a rehash of Bruce or any of the Robins, but really an amalgamation of all of them, which makes him feel more relatable or human, not just a wisecracking one-trick pony. It's a story I don't think we will ever see something like again, for the very fact I think creators are scared to try something new due to a lot of the higher-ups thinking the comic book fandom really hate change, and I don't blame them. Honestly, when you see a slew of hate videos for a series that hasn't even premiered yet. But Absolute Batman is proof that isn't true. As long as the writing is really good, with great artists to boot, fans will check it out. So maybe this is the best time to reboot the cyberpunk world with Terry as lead, maybe even in the Absolute universe. If you made it this far, thank you, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy it. And with that, this is the end of our video, and I'll see you in the next.